Al, how are you? The Rules Committee will come to order. We are here for consideration of H.R. 1473, the Department of Defense and Full Year Continuing Appropriations Act of 2011, and two H-Con Reses, 35 and 36, dealing with the two items that we will hear about. We're happy to welcome the Chairman of the Committee on Appropriations, my good friend, Mr. Rogers, and my other good friend, the ranking member, gentleman from Seattle, Mr. Dix. So, gentlemen, thanks to you both for being here, and let me say that without objection, any prepared remarks that you have will be included in the record in their entirety, and we welcome your summary. Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Chairman, ranking member Slaughter, and members of the committee, we're delighted to be back with you again. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
We're here today before you to present H.R. 1473, a bill making appropriations for the remainder of the fiscal year 2011. I'm seeking a traditional rule on the continuing resolution so that the House may consider and pass this bill as soon as possible. After months of difficult but necessary work, it's time we complete the 211 process and move on to next year's bills. This final CR is a remarkable accomplishment. Its historic level of cuts, tens of billions of dollars larger than any other non-defense cut in history, are the result of hard-fought negotiations that required all sides to come together to find common ground. It will allow Congress to continue the Republican majority's trend of budget reductions that dig our nation out of our dangerous debts and deficits. My committee, Mr. Chairman, went line by line through agency after agency's budgets this past weekend, ending at 2 o'clock this morning, to negotiate and craft deep but responsible reductions in virtually all areas of government. Our bill targets wasteful and duplicative spending, makes strides to rein in out-of-control federal bureaucracies, and will help bring our nation one step closer to eliminating our job-crushing level of debt. This led to the following cuts from the President's budget request. Agriculture accounts were reduced by 14%, Commerce, Justice, and Science by 12%, Energy and Water by 10%, Financial Services and General Government by 13%, Interior and Environment by 9%, Labor, HHS, and Education by 8%, Legislative Branch by 11%, State and Foreign Operations by 15%, and Transportation and HUD by 19%. The Department of Defense is funded at $513 billion, which is a $5 billion increase over 2010 to provide the necessary resources for our troops and the success of our nation's military actions. The new Republican majority is committed to bringing about real change in the way Washington spends the people's money. This bill honors that commitment, keeping precious taxpayer dollars where they are needed most, in the hands of businesses and individuals, so that they can create jobs and grow our economy. Mr. Chairman, I've been assisted very effectively by my friend, the ranking member of the full committee, Norm Dix. He has been helpful in every way we've asked him. We've differed on some issues, obviously, but we're friends and we understand each other's position. But I want to especially say thanks to Norm Dix for he and Bill Young's work on the defense part of this bill. There's nobody who knows the issues in that area better than Bill Young and Norm Dix. We trusted their judgment to the extent that we took the bill that they had crafted along with their Senate colleagues. We lifted that bill directly from the omnibus in December that we failed to pass and put that whole provision in this bill intact. So I want to especially say thanks to Norm for the defense part of the budget. That it was crucial. Let me mention just very briefly, Mr. Chairman. A lot of members asked us for funding specific projects. As the chairman and ranking member and the whole committee knows, we're not allowed by our rules anymore to specify projects, even though we know they're worthy. That's just not, we are not allowed to do that anymore. I'm very much aware of a project that the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Scott, about the deepening of the harbor at Charleston. We all know that that is a necessary, it has to be done. Most of the ports on the eastern seaboard have the same difficulty because of the new width of the new Panama Canal, which will require us to deepen the ports on the east coast, even though we can't specify that. I know the Corps of Engineers will have plenty of money. They also have the authority, and I'm sure they have the interest in seeing that those worthy projects come to fruition. But that's their judgment. But there's plenty of money here for that purpose, and they have the proper authority. And I'm sure it's high on their list of things that need to be done. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Dix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are at last, I believe, at the end of a long road to approving the consolidated appropriations bill for the current fiscal year. I appreciate the work that you, Ranking Member Slaughter, and other committee members have done over the past many weeks to approve rules that have allowed our government to remain open and functioning under continuing resolutions. And as much as I have enjoyed our often spirited discussions about the proper course to steer our nation's still fragile economy, it is my hope that tonight's action and the rule that will be reported will finally close the book on FY11 so that we can begin our work on the 2012 bills under regular order, as Chairman Rogers and I have committed to do. The rule that is being considered tonight makes in order debate over the Appropriations Act for the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2011. Attached to this legislation are bills that fund the remainder of the federal government's appropriations for the remainder of the fiscal year, which is now less than 6 months. The bill translates into law the agreement that was reached last Friday night between the Obama administration and the President, Speaker Boehner, and the Majority Leader of the Senate in order to avert a government shutdown. It reduces spending and continues investing in programs that are important to our future. As you know from my previous statements, it was my opinion that it would have been irresponsible and I believe unnecessary for us to allow our partisan differences to result in the chaos of a government shutdown. I said repeatedly that it would be the worst possible outcome, especially at a time when we are at war and when our economy is still fragile. But at the 11th hour, an agreement was reached. And as a result, families had their mortgage applications approved on time, small business loans were not delayed, people could visit our national parks and museums as they had planned, and hundreds of thousands of Americans got their paychecks on time, including our brave men and women in uniform. Over the weekend, the Appropriations Committee worked hard with our very phenomenal staff to fill in the framework that the leadership had agreed to, and the resulting bill that was drafted retains critical investments in our country's future while reducing spending by $38.5 billion from the current level of spending. Like any compromise, the path to H.R. 1473 required all entities to sacrifice on issues that were important to them in order to reach a final agreement. Some of the cuts that were agreed to during these negotiations will be painful, without a doubt, but combined with the sharp reductions in spending, it seems to me that a substantial investment in the future was nevertheless preserved. This bill that is now before us maintains current levels of Head Start enrollment, including the increased slots for newborns to 2-year-olds. It uses savings from ending the year-round Pell Grant to maintain the academic year Pell Grant maximum award. While the defense bill is 17 below the President's request, it is 5 above last year's enacted level. This bill fully funds personnel requirements including training in healthcare and DoD's express contingency needs. Community service block grants provide the means for states to address the education, health, nutrition, housing, and employment of the poor and elderly in their communities. While H.R. 1 cut the grants by $305 million, I am pleased that this bill restores almost all of their funding. There are also many decisions which I didn't like. The bill makes no high-speed rail dollars available in 2011, though it does not rescind all the available funding from prior years. The Food for Peace program is $190 million below last year's level. State and local law enforcement grants are cut by 17%. FEMA state and local grants, such as Homeland Security grants and urban area security grants, are $115 million below 2010 enacted levels, and EPA is $1.6 billion below the enacted level. As with any compromise, some members will see a glass half full and some will see a glass half empty. Members will have to consider all the ramifications of this compromise and vote their conscience. I also understand that the rule making the bill in order may make in order two concurrent resolutions that would call for separate votes on two controversial riders that cannot and should not be added to the underlying bill. It is planned that neither of these measures, restrictions on Planned Parenthood funding and prohibitions on implementation of the Affordable Care Act, is supported by the American people, and neither would be approved by the required 60 votes in the United States Senate. Therefore, I do not believe they have a place in our debate here in the House. And I would just underline that the administration strongly opposes both of these concurrent resolutions. And just to say one final thing, I want to congratulate Chairman Rogers for the way our staffs have worked together, the Democratic staff and the Republican staff on the committee. It's really a nonpartisan staff. Many of the people who were on our staff from last year are now in the majority staff and still doing very professional work. And to do this over a weekend and get this all done, even though we were a little late, was remarkable. And I just want to say that we have a good, positive relationship, which I want to maintain, because I want to see us have a chance to vote on amendments on the floor and on each of these 12 bills for 2012. So I appreciate all the cooperation we've had.
Thanks to both of you, and obviously it's been an ugly, messy, difficult, laborious process, but we have gotten here, and it's due in large part to your leadership. I do have to say, on behalf of the Rules Committee staff, that they've joined with you all in the all-nighter. Absolutely. And so I just want to make it clear that when the three of us were asleep, our staffs were working in the middle of the night.
With the chairman, yield.
Of course, I'm happy to. If anyone wants to respond to he's not sleep deprived, I don't believe. Unlike some of the people sitting around the room.
I have to tell you, the staff on both sides of the aisle in the House and the Senate have been absolutely remarkable. They've not slept in 3 months. We've been at this for 3 months. They've lost weight.
Let me just say that I do believe that some members of the Rules Committee have slept in the last 3 months. I don't want to claim that my staff has not slept in 3 months.
But the staff of your committee has been remarkable. The staff on both sides of the aisle in the House and the Senate have just been absolutely phenomenal. They work practically all night, almost every night, especially this past weekend, getting this bill ready to go. And so, Mr. Chairman, it deserves to be said numerous times that the staff has made incredible sacrifices for us to be where we are.
Well, and we do greatly appreciate them and appreciate the work that both of you put into this. And of course, Speaker Boehner represented the House in this, and no one is happy with this. No one is happy. I'm not happy with it. You're not happy with it. But it is a step forward. The President agreed to it, and I will say to my friend from Seattle that obviously those two votes are part of the agreement that was struck with the White House, and that is that the notion of ensuring that the Senate would in fact have these votes. So we do have those provisions in here, and I hope very much that we can move to a vote. We're going to comply with a 3-day layover requirement. By virtue of it being filed at 2 o'clock this morning, it means that we will not have the vote until Thursday in the House because of our commitment to comply with that. We will be considering the rule on the floor tomorrow, but we'll not have the vote until tomorrow, and we appreciate what you all are doing.
Mr. Chairman, could I comment on that? Thanks to your committee and thanks to your leadership, in large measure. The House adopted a new rule when your party took over control of the House that requires that all bills lay over at least 72 hours.
It's 3 days, actually. It's 3 days.
3 days. 3 days. To give every member of the House time to read and question the bill before they have to vote on it. That's brand new, and that's a reform that you pushed and the House adopted.
Well, we're
Not only that, but it's posted for the first time on the internet so
Right.
that the world can read it before.
It's actually been around for a long time, but we are enforcing it and subscribing to it, which is very, very important. Ms. Fox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I want to thank you also for the hard work that you've put in, as well as the staff, to get us to this point. And I think everybody breathed a big sigh of relief last Friday night late when the agreement was reached. But I need to bring up an issue that came up last week because since it came up, most of us haven't really had a chance to talk about it in a forum such as this, and I think it is important to do that. There are many of us in this body, many women in this body in particular, who are pro-life women. But last week, one of our members charged us as murderers of women. And I really take exception to that claim. And I want to share with you all some information that we didn't get a chance to share last week that I think is very important. Since 2005, women in the United States have received over 1.2 million abortions per year. And when they were asked why they were having an abortion, 74% said it would interfere with their current lifestyle and responsibilities. So 3/4 of them are having an abortion because it's inconvenient for them to be pregnant. 73% also said they couldn't afford the child that she was carrying. 48% said they didn't want to be a single parent or had trouble relationship with the father of the child. And fewer than 2% replied that their abortion was a result of rape or incest. One child worldwide is aborted every 26 seconds. That means over 137 unborn babies an hour, 3,304 unborn babies a week, and over 100,516 unborn babies a month. Worldwide, 42 million abortions occur annually. And as I said, my colleague claims that those who oppose taxpayer-funded elective abortions are trying to kill women, but this fails to recognize that approximately 51% of children born are female. If you do the math, and each year 603,100 women a year are killed by abortions before they even have a chance to live. Abortion doesn't leave the mother unscathed either. 97% of women experience pain during their abortion, with 61% reporting moderate to severe pain. Women have placed an abortion more painful than sprains, fractures, and arthritis, but the equivalent of cancer pain or pain following an amputation. This sounds more severe than the, quote, slight discomfort most doctors warn of, and perhaps are important signs doctors and patients alike should note. Oxford University conducted a study that produced evidence against the general safety of abortions. Out of 1,182 legal abortions, 16.7% of women required blood transfusions to counter hemorrhaging. 4.2% experienced a torn cervix. 1.2% experienced a perforated uterus. 1% experienced thrombosis, otherwise known as a deep blood clot in their lungs. 27%, more than a quarter of them, experienced some sort of infection that either required treatment or medication post-abortion. Surgical abortions can lead to sepsis, endometriosis, cervical lacerations, uterine, bowel, or bladder lacerations, pelvic inflammatory disease, and incomplete abortions and retained tissues. Chemical abortions can lead to severe pain, cramping, nausea, diarrhea, and hemorrhage, infection, or ruptured undiagnosed ectopic where the pregnancy takes place outside the uterine wall. Since 1972, there have been at least 350 identified deaths from legal abortions resulting from anesthesia, infection, hemorrhage, ruptured ectopic pregnancy, and embolism. My colleague further went on to say last Friday, you're allowed to have an abortion if you've been raped or it's a matter of incest. However, you have to have a receipt. Did you know that? It's sort of like an old German Nazi movie, show me your papers, end quote. In order to understand how ludicrous this claim is, let's examine exactly what the phrase, give me your papers, referred to. The Nazis started enacting a series of laws meant to demonize and isolate Jews and other non-Aryans from German society in every sphere, economically, legally, and socially. To gather support for the increasingly anti-Semitic laws, the Nazis began blaming Jews for all the faults and struggles Germany experienced. These laws gradually began removing Jews from Germany's civil service, restrict the number of non-Aryans in schools as students and professors, and revoke the license of Jewish physicians in treating non-Jewish patients. Nazi officials would usually shout, quote, show me your papers, end quote, when they confronted a member of the resistance, typically Jews fleeing for the border, and usually was the phrase used before arrest or worse. Indeed, the two exemptions under No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act are if the pregnancy is the result of forcible rape, or if the pregnant woman is a minor, hence incest, and the woman suffers from a physical disorder, injury, or illness, including a life-endangering physical condition caused by or arising from the pregnancy itself that would place her in danger of death unless an abortion is performed as certified by a physician. Only 15 to 25% of women who become pregnant due to rape or incest actually obtain an abortion. Fewer than 2% of all abortions are due to rape or incest, and fewer than 4% of all abortions are due to putting the health of the mother in danger. These 6% of patients are why we have placed such conditions in H.R. 3, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, which will soon come before the House for consideration. Choosing to terminate the life of an unborn child is not a flippant matter, nor should it be subsidized by the American taxpayer. It is simply unacceptable for a girl or woman at any point in her pregnancy to walk into a clinic, regardless of circumstances, and receive an abortion paid for by the taxpayers of this country. In these cases, the choice my liberal colleagues profess to love comes at the expense of others, the most vulnerable, voiceless, unborn children of this country. There's no reason that taxpayers should be forced to fund elective abortion. More importantly, we must not forget the defenseless unborn children who cannot defend themselves. We must stand up and fight for these silent victims in our country. If we're going to choose anything, let us choose to give those who cannot speak a voice and the ability to make their own choices by defending their fundamental right to life. I have always believed that women should have equal rights in this country, and I have never wanted to see women discriminated against in any way, and yet I'm a pro-life woman. And I take real offense at the claims that have been made against pro-life women. And for whatever help the two of you gave us in stopping the taxpayer funding for abortions in the District of Columbia, I thank you. And I think because 73% of the people in this country believe that no taxpayer funding should be going for abortions, this should be an easy place for us to save money for the taxpayers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, the gentlelady is referring to me. In this country where over 50 million people have no health insurance at all, And if there is success here in doing away with the health care bill, that number will climb. But in this country, in America, millions of people, men as well as women, get their health care screenings for cancer and their treatment at Planned Parenthood. If anyone in this room or anybody in this country believes for a minute that by defunding Planned Parenthood, you will save a lot of people their taxpayers paying for abortion, believe that by doing away with Planned Parenthood that women and men and young women will not die, you are sorely mistaken. And it will be an act of this Congress that took away from them their ability to get the health care that they are entitled to. I have had so many calls during all the layoffs and the unemployment, sometimes from fathers. I had one from a father that told me that the only health care his wife and daughter had, and we hear this all the time, is Planned Parenthood. Why would you want to do that? Everybody in this country knows that no federal money is used for abortion. Why do you keep trying to perpetuate what is an absolute untruth? There is no money used from the federal taxpayers to provide abortion. This Congress has gone so far as to say that the District of Columbia may not use tax money it raises itself for abortion. Now, that's not just saying, we all agree that no federal money is being spent here. You can't spend your own. Who do you think you are? And if you believe this bill that we were talking about, the one I was really concerned about show me your papers, if you believe that requiring a woman who hasn't had an abortion that was covered because of rape or incest has to keep those receipts and papers for the IRS, you have not read that bill. Now, if I could get back to the bill before us today. I know a lot of people are going to say what we're doing here is good enough, but I don't think it's either good or enough. The bill was introduced at 2 a.m., and we all know that. But for the first time in history of this country, we're going to consider two resolutions to correct a bill that we haven't even passed. First two resolutions have never been done together, but certainly something we're not even passed. I think it's a cynical abuse, and I think, again, that what you're trying to do is not so much work on the deficit, which all of us agree has to be done, all of us. But I think you're trying to simply get rid of what your pet projects have been, the things that you don't do. Maybe you're trying to undo the agreement between the Senate and the President. That's a possibility. Maybe you're rewriting the bill in the hopes that it will fail in the Senate. I think that's a possibility, particularly with these riders on it. But I'm not going to push in for this flawed bill, and as a result, I absolutely have strong opposition to both the rule, the underlying bill. I ask unanimous consent to put the statement of the administration in the record, where they say that they strongly oppose the attempts to include language in the underlying bill, deny funding for critical women's health services, or to prohibit funding to implement the Affordable Care Act, making health care more affordable and accessible for all Americans. Thank you.
Without objection, the statement of the administration policy will appear in the record. Mr. Bishop.
May I thank both of you for being here again and for your tireless service. We've said repeatedly you've been here too often, and you have been. But finally bringing a conclusion of last year's work is something for which we can all be grateful. There is more good in this compromise than there is bad. The only thing I have to do with, for you, Chairman Rogers, is ask you once again to gird up your loins, because everything that is good that has been won in this bill has to be won all over again in the next budget bill that comes forward. I do especially appreciate some of the provisions that you put in here that deals with the interior. As someone from the western states, I understand those situations very clearly. It is, once again, a positive. But I cannot, I cannot also go without admitting that all these things that have been gained and won in this particular continuing resolution has to be started over again, because those issues come back to the table one more time. So I hope you get a few hours of sleep somewhere, sometime, because the real issue starts all over again. But thank you for your dedicated work, both of you, in trying to do what we should have done last year, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. If I could just say this, Mr. Chairman. The President just issued a statement saying he supports this bill and its deficit reduction provisions, and that it reflects a compromise with the Congress. So the President is supporting the bill. As he, I'm sorry.
This is a change from the statement of administration policy that was just submitted to the record, then?
It's in that statement. If I may read.
Oh, okay. So it's part of the statement.
This is the statement that was handed to the clerk, and I'm quoting, "The administration supports H.R. 1473, making continuing appropriations for the Department of Defense and other departments and agencies of the government for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2011, and for other purposes." That's the opening statement, a sentence in the statement.
It is, okay. Well, I didn't see it. I just heard, well, I just heard that you said that the administration opposed this. Well, the opening line is,
He opposes the two concurrent resolutions.
oh, right, I see, I understand that. I just inferred, well, I just heard the administration opposes this. I mean, I'm sorry if I, was led to believe that the administration was opposed to the bill. Anyway, Mr. McGovern.
Well, I have great admiration for both the chairman and ranking member. I don't have a lot of admiration for the underlying bill, however. I have a great deal of concern about the priorities that this new Congress has decided to put forward, and they're priorities that I think are going to result in slowing down this economic recovery. I mean, there's significant money's being cut out of infrastructure, roads, bridge, projects that are absolutely essential to our district. Mr. Dix mentioned high-speed rail. I mean, the whole world seems to get it when it comes to high-speed rail, but us. We're falling way behind on those things. Those not only are good for our economy, they also create a lot of jobs. I also think that a lot of the cuts have disproportionately impacted some of the most vulnerable in our community, in our society. We made it a point to protect Donald Trump's tax cut at the very end of last year, and we protect taxpayer-funded subsidies for oil companies, and we protect no big defense contracts. We increased the defense budget, notwithstanding it's below what the President requested, but it's still an increase over last year's levels. Corn ethanol subsidies, all protected, but it seems that the toughest choices get put on the backs of, of everyday people and those who are struggling the most in this country. And I appreciate the President trying to work out a deal with the Republicans, but I think what this reflects is, what this bill reflects does not reflect my priorities. And so I appreciate the hard work that you both have put into this. I appreciate the hard work of the staffs. I know the people work very diligently in long hours, and I think Mr. Bishop is right that this is the first step, but I fear it's coming attractions of what's yet to come. And when I look at the budget that we're going to be dealing with, the FY 2012 budget, it is there are far more severe cuts in programs that I care deeply about. I think the American people want a leaner government. We all want a leaner government. I just don't want a meaner government. And I think that there are, budgets are about choices, they're about our priorities, and these aren't the only places that we could have looked, and they certainly shouldn't have been the places where we began. So this is going to be a week which I would anticipate that this will pass, and then I would expect that you have the votes lined up for your budget to pass. But I really do worry that that this bill is going to be is going to slow down the economic recovery, because I could look at these cuts right now and tell you that there are lots of jobs that will not be created because of where these cuts have been made. I don't want to belabor the point. I've said this when you've been here before, but I do appreciate your dedication to the institution and to the work that you and your staffs have done, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trevor. Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McGovern says he fears this may be coming attractions. I've promised my constituency this is coming attractions, and they think it's a great first step and really look forward to the opportunity to do it in its totality, not just the piecemeal fashion that you all have been forced to operate. As a member of the Budget Committee as well, I'm proud of the work we put out. I hope that's going to make your collective jobs easier. And I'll say to you, Mr. Chairman, that your staff has been tremendously supportive of me. I had a stack of questions about everything that was going on here. They've been working with me throughout the afternoon to answer those questions, and so I have nothing here, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to compliment my colleagues, particularly the chairman and ranking member on appropriations. They were given a framework of three-stool negotiations that took place between the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate and the President of the United States. They weren't in the room, and none of us were in the room. And as I said on Friday night when I voted against the stopgap measure, I was absolutely certain that there was no member in the House of Representatives other than Speaker Boehner that knew the substance of the details that were agreed upon between the three principals. I studied it very carefully afterward and learned, among other things, and rather I'll take umbrage with the fact that there were not more people in the room. I think that there would have been a wider reflection of the overall aspects of the current environment that we're in. I echo the sentiments of Congressman McGovern. All of us want a leaner government. I don't think any of us want a meaner government. But it seems where we are headed is that you can do more with less. And if I follow the logical conclusion to that, then you ought to be able to do everything with nothing, if that is the case. And it's very disturbing. Referencing my colleague and friend, Dr. Fox's comments, I thought her expressions were heartfelt and moving. And I happen to fundamentally disagree. I don't think abortions in America started with Roe versus Wade. And I don't think if we do everything that you say, Dr. Fox, that women are not still going to be confronted with an awesome way of going about their lives. They did before Roe versus Wade. They did before there was any popular notion about health opportunities for people. And I've said in this committee, and I repeat, I know three women, or knew three women that I went to school with in college that had miserable circumstances because they didn't have an opportunity, and this would have been in the 50s. They didn't have an opportunity to have appropriate counseling or schooling. And one, I'll never forget, died as a result of the use of a coat hanger. Now, those things ought not occur in our society. And quite frankly, those of us that have never had that circumstance but have participated in causing it to come about, I really think men ought to butt out of the conversation. And I really think old men in the United States Senate ought to butt out of the conversation. And it's an interesting proposition for me. I say it humorously, but God made us all. And if God had determined that it was going to be a 50-50 proposition, we wouldn't be having this discussion. And you think about that. We sit around and pontificate about things that we don't have a clue about, that women have to go through. And I went through these cuts. And I know that it is your responsibility, and you did it well by going through the variety of programs and for the remainder of this year bringing about cuts. But to show you how much we care about children, we're going to cut youth bill. We're going to cut community health care centers. I don't know how many of y'all got community health care centers in your congressional district, but I could have started with 0 on that one because I know the good that they do, and if I add to that rural, then I know even more the good that they do. We're going to cut public health scientific services. We're going to cut community block grant programs. Mentoring children of prisoners, that's an interesting one. We plussed up the cuts from what was originally done in that one. We did save Even Start. Thank y'all for that. Safe schools and citizenship education, $331 million in cuts. That's how much we care about children, you see. TRIO, Gear Up, the Institute of Education Science, Learn and Serve America. What's the point, LC? First off, if I had been President of the United States, when you walked in the room, Boehner and Reed, I would have said to you, all programs having to do with children are not on the table. And if we are going to do something, we're going to find the money somewhere else. What I said in response to 2 reporters that called me over the weekend was that Obama and Harry Reid ought to be ashamed of themselves, and John Boehner ought to be doubly ashamed since he had the responsibility of matching up with them and even Biden on some occasions. I thought Vice President Biden made a very sensible statement. He got angry, apparently, according to the reports, I was not there, and said we ought to just take it to the people. And that's what we ought to do. Now, everybody that has any understanding of what we are doing here knows that short-term cuts are not going to cure the long-term fiscal problems in this nation. And all of us know that we eventually are going to have to address those particular matters, and it is not going to be easy. And the framework that you've outlined first off, with the Ryan proposal that will be coming, doesn't even get close to what is going to be needed. These short-term cuts, again, I echo Jim McGovern's statements, are going to, in my view, negatively impact the current fragile economy. Eleanor, you'll be glad to know that speaking to those same reporters, I said what I strongly believe, and that is that this United States Congress needs to get out of the business of running the District of Columbia like it's a colony. That's crazy, and these people pay taxes, they die in wars, they do the same things that we do, and then get dumped on by all of us coming in here and dirtying up their city and going out and then coming back and leaving potholes and all sorts of things. And I can't begin to talk about the other cuts, let alone the ones for health care. I think it's absolutely absurd for us as citizens in a country as great as ours to pummel what ought be the shining city on the hill and what could be if we would but butt out of their business and let them be on about their responsibilities. I get a little bit tired of all of y'all going around and acting like you're doing something. This little bit of cuts to less than 15% of the budget is going to be a pimple by comparison to what we're going to face when we get to the defense budget and we get to Medicaid and Medicare and what I think that you're getting ready to propose. But what you need to do is cause the Bush tax cuts to be eliminated and to make permanent payroll tax cuts and stop balancing budgets and thinking that you're doing something that's going to help poor people. I remind you, when all hope is shorn and that we have not discharged our Christian responsibility of taking care of the least of us, then you can full well expect horrors that I can envision for you long after I'm not here. If you are alive 20 years from now and we proceed down the present course, you will need a bodyguard to go to work. And it's just that simple. And you can't build a fence high enough, and you can't build a river or a moat wide enough to stop those that don't have from wanting to have and from eventually taking from those that do. I think we should ask millionaires and billionaires in this country what they would like to do. Nobody seems to ever ask them. We give loopholes to companies that don't pay any taxes and then come in here and talk about cutting programs for children. How sensible is that?
Well, you know, we've heard a lot over the course of the last few weeks, particularly about the CRs. But, you know, had this Congress not pushed the status quo, had this Congress not taken the proactive push in regards to cutting spending, we would be at the status quo. We would be spending money, we currently spend money that we don't have. You know, Friday night was a great night for one thing only, was that it protected the pay of our troops, those men and women that are serving overseas. And I truly, truly appreciate what both of you did to make sure that happened. That was the number one priority for us. The second priority is to cut spending. I think the American people have been clear about what they expect from us. You know, we talk about priorities. Reducing our spending is a priority. How we determine what priorities get cut is up to this body. And through great debate on the House floor and in committees, they'll determine that. But at the end of the day, we can't continue to do what we do today, and that's spend money that we don't have. You know, I've heard so much about this is just a pittance. It is. We're talking about small numbers compared to the trillions of dollars that we've got to cut in this upcoming budget in 2012. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's what the American people really want to see happen from this Congress. You know, the small numbers that we've done today, you're right, we pat ourselves on the back, but it's not enough. We've got to do more. Otherwise, this great country, what we do to help our fellow man, is going to be in greater jeopardy because we may not be around to do it if we don't have the money to do it with. And we can't do it by spending more than we bring in. We can't do it by taxing our people in submission. And I agree with one thing, that we have loopholes that businesses utilize not to pay their fair share. And I think that in this coming budget, one of the things that we want to do is talk about closing those loopholes so that everybody does pay their fair share. Well, that's what's going to be involved in both. It's going to go to committees to do that. That's what the open process is about, in your committees. So, you know, while I'm not happy with the final number, but you're right, compromise did rule the day. And we kept the government open. But more importantly, we were able to make the promise we made to those that are serving us overseas and in this country, those men and women in service. We kept them afloat. And they deserve that. Their families deserve that. So I applaud you again for doing that.
I'd just like to make one comment. NBC did about 15 minutes with the spouses of these troops that were deployed, and they were saying they were going to lose their home, they were going to lose their ability to feed their family. I mean, at least we didn't fail that. Now, what I would say to the gentleman, and I really mean this because I think you're very sincere in what you've just said, it's got to be fair. It's got to be the entire government, and it also has to look at revenue. David Stockman last night, Ronald Reagan's budget director, who he took to the woodshed a few times, he laid it out. He is in agreement with what the group of six in the Senate are doing, what I think is the fair way to do it. And you've got to put everything on the table, including closing loopholes, but also we may have to raise some revenue. And that may be the only way we can put a fair package together that everybody can be supportive of. And, you know, you just can't use slogans. you got to sit down and really think about how do we get there and how do we put something together that both sides can support in order to get to move forward and do what we all know we have to do.
Just one last comment. You know, in regards to doing more with less, I've come from local government, and what that means is that you go back to what your core priorities are, and you do work harder. You work more intelligently in regards to getting the actions that you want to get. It's because in government what we tend to do, and I was in local government, you throw money at the problem to try to solve the problem. It doesn't necessarily work that way. So by doing more with less, it's about working smarter. It's about, shaving it down to the bare necessities to get what you need to get done. And I do believe that you can do that. And I don't believe the federal government necessarily has always been a great steward of that. But you will when you're forced into it. We were forced into it in local and state governments, and I think the federal government now is going to be forced into reprioritizing what they do, and let's do a better job with the money that we have. And that's all.
Thanks. I have a couple questions for the chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the majority party for making this bill available for us to read. It's obviously important to have the 72-hour notice, so I appreciate we're all just... Sorry, the 3-day notice. I stand corrected. It is not a 72-hour notice. It is a 3-day notice, and it's interesting math there. But regardless, we do have some time to read the bill. So we're all in the process of doing that. We woke up this morning. We have been looking at it. I've been looking at it. I have a couple questions for the chairman in that regard. One is I've already seen kind of the media dissecting it, articles dissecting it, and while the $38 billion figure has been touted, a number of articles say, oh, it's actually $15 billion, and I saw one that said it's actually 14.7, and they go, can you explain how, I mean, this is a major differential between different people who've analyzed this budget. How is it that some are saying it's only 14.7 billion in savings, some are saying it's 38? People are coming out with different numbers for the actual savings. And what is your take on how much is actually being saved with this CR?
I haven't seen the stories that say it's 14 billion. It is $38.5 billion, which is the actual less spending than the current level. The figure is like 79 billion below what the president requested.
So, I mean, what I'm seeing, and again, I haven't had time to go account by account, but what I basically see is that, they said, some of these accounts wouldn't have been spent anyway. It's money that the program is gone, this, that, the other. So that's what gets the 38 down to the 15 or something. It sounds like there's a lot of money that was basically going to be saved anyway under a static CR. Is that true?
Well, it's clear that significant reductions in both discretionary and mandatory spending is needed to right the fiscal ship and create a better economic environment. This CR will make real and lasting budget reductions by cutting hundreds of billions of dollars from the federal budget over the next decade through a combination of discretionary spending cuts and mandatory spending cuts. Of the spending cuts in the final agreement that do come from non-discretionary spending accounts, more than a third of those are achieved by cutting programs associated with Obamacare.
I don't think that was my question. I was asking more about the discrepancy in the actual numbers that are being reported. We're obviously just having the opportunity to go through this. What is being reported, and I think we as members want your help in digesting is, again, this issue with regard to whether some of the cuts is just unspent money that wasn't going to be spent anyway.
I'm trying to tell you that we cut both discretionary and mandatory spending. And I think that's probably where the people you're talking about are getting.
Sure. Let me give the ranking member a chance if you can address that, and I'll go on to the next question real quickly.
Comment. You said that they would not spend the money. What I find at the Defense Department is if they don't spend it, then they use that for reprogramming to do something else. So it ultimately is going to get spent in most cases. So when you take away that authority, that budget authority, I think, and it scores by CBO as a cut.
So you're saying that some of that, okay, so there's the 15 billion in cuts, everybody agrees there's actually that. The second 18 billion, you're saying some of that might have been spent if we didn't actually take it back. Some might not, some might be spent.
That was mandatory spending, the so-called chimps. And,
Yeah.
and that is, those are scored by CBO as actual cuts.
Sure, and let me go, again, back to the chairman and ask if he has a revised figure for what the deficit will be now for this fiscal year 2011 with these cuts.
You'd have to ask the chairman of the Budget Committee.
Okay, certainly 159. It's okay. So
we got to see how much of this is spent. You got to get to outlays too.
Sure, and we have to see obviously what the actual revenues are at this point as projections. But I guess the point being, $1.5 trillion, and before I came to Congress, I was in business. So let me just take a bunch of zeros off of that, and let's just
significant.
Yeah, so if you're a businessman and you're losing $150,000 a year, you're a small businessman. You're going to use up your life savings and go out of business in a year. And while you get cutting it down to $148,000 a year loss is better than $150,000. You're still going to go out of business, in the same amount of time. That's the predicament our country is facing. And yet we still have, talking about kind of the real money, $157 billion on overseas wars. That are receiving less and less support from members of both parties. We increased the defense budget by $5 billion. Now, we all want to have the best defense we can afford. The question is, what we can afford? So my point would be, we need to look deeper. And I just also, I guess want to ask the chairman if he's had a chance to study the Simpson-Bowles Commission recommendations specifically for defense reductions, which would have been, had they been instituted in this CR, about a $60 billion savings just in the first year, and then over $100 billion a year, in subsequent years. And I just want to ask the chairman if he had a chance to look over those thoughtful recommendations.
All of those things are the province of the Budget Committee. We don't decide how much money is spent. That's the Budget Committee and the Congress that adopts a budget resolution. We take what we are given by the Budget Committee in terms of dollars, and we allocate that across the 12 subcommittees that make the 12 appropriations bills. I would say this, the amount of money in this bill is $1,049,000,000,000. That's the actual amount of money that is to be spent.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of money. And again, as a former businessman, the difference between losing $150,000 a year and $149,000 or $148,000 a year is one that, is a contextual difference that might, in fact, worth be pointing out, but you go bankrupt just as quickly. And with that, I would certainly, understanding that the charge is not fully yours, by the way. The Ways and Means Committee shares as important, if not more, responsibility for this with regard to entitlements and revenues, which are part of a bigger part. Right. So that's even a bigger piece than yours. But I think we need to do more on your part as well, and I encourage you to continue work in that regard.
Let me add this as well.
I'll let the gentleman answer.
Of the total budget of the U.S., more than two-thirds of that budget are the entitlements: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, food stamps, veterans' pensions, and so on. That's two-thirds of the budget. The one-third that's left is what we appropriate, and more than half of that is defense. So we are cutting, what we're talking about cutting here is from roughly 14% of the budget. That's where all this money is coming from. Now, if you want to get into entitlements, you want to get into tax policy, and all of those issues, you've got to go to the Ways and Means Committee.
No, none of my questions were about those areas. I was simply pointing out that even within the recommendations of the bipartisan Bowles-Simpson Commission, they had more cuts in your specific area. Yes, your area alone won't get us out of the fiscal mess we're in, but they had some thoughtful cuts for defense and even some non-defense cuts that are not included in the CR. And we all need to do our part, as we all know, and we need to do a little more from this side as well. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Scott. Webster.
I have no questions. I'd just like to thank the gentlelady from North Carolina for her courage. Reed. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to be part of this Rules Committee, and at this point in time, I'm glad that we are coming together, both sides of the aisle, once and for all recognizing this debt crisis is a promise of the nation. And I'm glad to hear whatever rhetoric, if there's not substance to it, at least there's rhetoric out there that we're going to focus on the debt on both sides of the aisle and get it under control. So I'm proud of the fact that we are moving on from the billion-dollar conversation to the trillion-dollar conversation. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reed. Gentlemen, thank you both for your extraordinary service. And
We're not going to be back next
here.
week, by the way.
Well, you know, I don't think
Promise is promise.
the plan is for none of us to be back next week, if you want to know the truth. I don't plan to be here myself. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to proceeding to the floor with the rule tomorrow, and then in compliance with our 3-day layover requirement on the floor with the bill itself on Thursday. So thank you both very much.
Thank the gentlemen and the members of the committee for your courtesies.
Thanks. And now we will hear from others who wish to testify on this. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Holmes Norton, gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, and our friend from the Marianas Islands, Mr. Sablan. So if the 3 or 4 of you would like to, excuse me, well, it doesn't say that he's not coming. I've still invited him. So if now Mr. Sablan was here, has he decided not to join us? Anyway.
Maybe he'll be back.
Ms. Holmes Norton, please proceed. And let me just say, without objection, if you have any prepared remarks, they will appear in the record in their entirety, and we welcome your summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will only summarize my my testimony because I do have prepared testimony. I should say I would like to us to stop meeting like this even more than you would. But I'm back here for the 4th time in little more than a month, and for the 2nd time in a week. Last Friday represented the possibility of the biggest setback for the District of Columbia in 15 years, when the federal government almost took the District of Columbia down with it, because this committee refused to pass an amendment which would simply have allowed. You can't hear me? Hello? Can you hear me now? I think it's on. Okay. All right. I had said that we had a terrible scare when, for the first time in 15 years, it looked like the federal government was going to take the District of Columbia government down with it, because this committee refused a number of amendments, each of which would simply have let the district continue to spend its own local funds for the rest of the year. I am here talking almost exclusively about local funds, which should be of no interest to you because they are of no interest to any red-blooded American. We're not interested in anybody's local matters. The committee turned a deaf ear to me. This has produced outraged public in the district who took to the streets with civil disobedience yesterday. Out in front of the Dirksen building, led by the mayor himself and members of the city council. But they were well aware that the initiative for the CR was in the House, and that the anti-home rule riders originated in the House as well. I offered an amendment before, and I offer it again, to allow the status quo. And the status quo would keep the district spending its own local funds on abortions for low-income women. I ask you to reconsider and allow my amendment to go to the floor. It is certainly the case, as it has been for a very long time, that Americans differ with respect to reproductive choice for women. It has never been the case that any American would believe that members of Congress who had nothing to do with raising local funds would have anything to say about this or any other issue in a district not her own. But the bill also establishes a new private school voucher program for the district, one we didn't ask for, one that no elected official was consulted about. And if you want to speak about local, nothing is more local than how a jurisdiction chooses to educate its own children. Remarkably, the bill before you offers even more money than was in H.R. 1 because it funds, and this is an appropriation bill, it funds a startup, a whole new private school voucher program for 5 years, when H.R. 1 would have funded it for 1 year. This, as the Republicans are cutting billions of dollars from public education in the United States, yet they find $100 million for a congressionally imposed voucher program that the local jurisdiction does not want. If this House was interested in the education of our children, it would commend the district for having the most robust, the largest charter school system in the United States, so large, so attractive, that it now educates 40% of our children who have voted with their feet and chosen charter schools. I would challenge any of my colleagues on the rostrum whether you have an alternative to your public school system nearly as large as the one we have created. And I remind you, it was created with the help of Speaker Newt Gingrich, who on Home Rule grounds worked with me for a bill to enlarge charter schools in the District of Columbia. My amendment would eliminate the reauthorization of this voucher program and instead redirect the funding equally divided between our charter schools and our District of Columbia public schools, which I think ought to be rewarded for having done more to improve their school system over the last several years than any urban school system in the district, in the United States. According to the so-called nation's report card, the National Assessment of Education Progress, the district's public schools in their 4th and 8th grade, where we do the testing, were the only school districts in the United States to show, among urban school districts, to show significant improvement in math and reading. They should be commended. Our charter schools, which educate almost half of our children, should be rewarded, not punished with a voucher school system, a voucher program that we do not want in our city. Madam Chair, I do want to note that the charter schools I'm talking about have been quite remarkable, and I think they ought to be studied. Why is it these charter schools, which have a larger proportion of our African American children, because those children are more likely to seek alternatives from the public schools in their district, and finding a charter school will choose them, and have more disadvantaged children for that reason? Why is it that our charter schools are scoring twice as high on standardized math and reading? If you had that in your district, wouldn't you want to fund it more, not fund something else, which according to the official tests given by the Department of Education did not improve at all the scores of the children in the voucher program when compared with the children in the D.C. public schools? And why is it that our charter schools have a graduation rate 25% above the rate of the improved district public schools and 8% above the national average? Are you graduating students at the national average? Madam Chairman, my amendment would also redirect the $2.3 million increase over what H.R. 1 had in the voucher program in fiscal 2011 to our charter schools. All I ask from this committee for my constituents is the respect you demand for your own. If you have that respect, then you will not support legislation that strips the power of a local government to spend its own local money and to determine its own policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Norton. Mr. Kucinich?
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify here, and I appreciate your attention. I am proposing an amendment to the bill that says that none of the funds made available by this act may be used for military operations in Libya. The President recently released his legal justification for the war, arguing that he was not required to come to Congress for prior authorization because the war is in our national interest and because it's not really a war. We may not all agree on the merits of the intervention in Libya, but I hope that we can all agree that Congress has a constitutional obligation to have a full and ample debate on the commitment of U.S. armed forces to a war abroad. As the United States mulls the possibility of providing arms to Libyan rebels, we must take into consideration the cost of the war, the potential for further instability in the region, the long-standing objectives of this war, which at present remain somewhat murky and ill-defined. The implications for our national security cannot be ignored. That's why I'm offering this amendment with the support of Representatives Jones, Woolsey, McClintock, Ron Paul, and Pete Stark to defund U.S. military intervention in Libya. These operations have already cost the United States over $600 million, and that's without any participation by the Congress. And with the first 10 days costing the U.S. approximately $55 million per day. Wars of choice facilitate false choices here at home and in the name of fiscal responsibility. Congress is expected to vote on a budget this week that privatizes Medicare, increases taxes for some of the richest Americans, limits food stamp assistance to low-income families. I mean, if the U.S. so-called humanitarian intervention is at stake here, then we look at the humanitarian intervention in Kosovo as a precedent. We know the United States is going to continue to bear the majority of the cost of the military and post-conflict costs. In that conflict in Kosovo, the U.S. spent $2.8 billion fighting the war and another $2 billion to replace the munitions it used over Kosovo. The administration says this is not a war. The U.S. has dropped 2,000-pound bombs, conducted hundreds of airstrikes. I read there were as many as 200 Tomahawk missiles. Last week, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization strike killed 13 Libyan rebels fighting against Gaddafi's forces. UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, recently reported that tens of thousands of Libyan children are at risk, citing 20 children, most under the age of 10, that have lost their lives due to fighting. I mean, when's it going to be considered a war? Day 60, civilian deaths numbering 30, 5,000 boots on the ground. Our involvement in Libya can only prolong a civil war and will inevitably result in more civilian casualties. We now hear that U.S. military commanders are considering sending U.S. troops in despite promises that the administration will have no boots on the ground. We're also told we would not have a no-fly zone in Libya. Look, the Constitution is clear. You know, Article 1, Section 8 makes it abundantly clear that only Congress has the ability to declare war or authorize the use of military force. This institution should not stand by idly as a war of choice with significant ramifications for our national and economic security is waged, absent the express consent of the Congress of the United States. It was 224 years ago that our Constitution was approved. We, as an institution, according to the founders, are first among equals. We're the result of Article 1, Congress, Article 2, the executive. it is in the interest of the historic mission of this constitutional government that we take this opportunity to reclaim Congress's rightful role and to insist that this administration respect the Constitution of the United States. And the only chance that we will have, I believe, respectfully, Madam Chair and members of the committee, is on this amendment. So I respectfully request your careful consideration. I would also finally like to say, this is not about whether you like President Obama or not. It is not about whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. It is about whether or not our Constitution is the law of the land, and that our Constitution, that we can have confidence enough in it, that it's always going to be faithfully upheld. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kucinich. Ms. Norton, I have simply got to respond a little bit to a couple of the comments that you've made tonight. It has always puzzled me that people ignore the Constitution about the District of Columbia and the role of the Congress. Mr. Kucinich is quoting Article 1, Section 8, and I would like to do that too. It says, Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may, by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of government of the United States. The phrase exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever has been interpreted to mean that Congress has complete authority over the district, thereby limiting local self-government by the city's residents. The District of Columbia is not the same as a congressional district. And it is our responsibility to write the laws and determine funding for the District of Columbia. The Constitution clearly gives us that authority. And so to say that we are doing something that we wouldn't do for a district is absolutely accurate, because we don't have the same control over the 435 districts that we have throughout our country that make up the Congress. And the other thing that I need to mention is that you know as well as...
Can I respond to your reading of the Constitution, Madam Chair?
Well, I'd like to finish my comments, and then I'd be happy for you to respond. You know, and I suspect every member of this committee knows, and if they haven't had a summary brought to them in the last day or two, they would know it by experience, that Americans, I said it earlier, Americans oppose taxpayer funding for abortion, and Democrats themselves have routinely accepted D.C. abortion funding ban and even included it in most Democrat appropriations bills when they were in charge. And let me give you a little history lesson. When President Clinton signed the D.C. abortion funding ban, which is known as the Dornan Amendment, into law 6 times. President Barack Obama signed the D.C. abortion funding ban into law for FY09 when he signed an Omnibus Appropriations Act sent to him by a Democrat-controlled House and Senate. When he was senator, President Obama voted for legislation including the D.C. abortion funding ban twice, once as a part of a continuing resolution in FY07 and once as part of the Transportation, Treasury, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Act, FY06. Vice President Joe Biden voted for legislation including the D.C. abortion funding ban 7 times since 1995, when the policy was included in various bills to appropriate funding for the District of Columbia. Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi voted for legislation including the D.C. abortion funding ban 14 times since 1995, when the policy was included in various bills. In just 4 years as Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi shepherded 3 bills containing the D.C. funding abortion ban in 3 separate fiscal years. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid voted for legislation including the D.C. abortion funding ban 10 times since 1995, when the policy was included in various bills to appropriate funding for the District of Columbia. Reid shepherded 3 bills containing the D.C. abortion funding ban. Majority Leader Reid also voted for the D.C. abortion funding ban in 1996, the last time the issue was considered as an individual amendment. Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin has voted for legislation including the D.C. funding ban 9 times since 1995. Durbin offered his own legislation that included the D.C. abortion funding ban twice, and I have the sources for those. Minority Whip Steny Hoyer voted for legislation including the D.C. abortion funding ban 18 times since 1995, when the policy was included in various bills. As Majority Leader Steny Hoyer shepherded 3 bills containing the D.C. abortion funding ban for 3 separate fiscal years through the House, and legislation containing the D.C. abortion funding ban has received more than 150 Democrat votes in the House on 16 occasions since 1995, when the policy was included in various bills. And I have the sources for each one of those comments. So I'd like to say this is not something that's been foisted upon the District of Columbia by the Republicans in the majority in the House of Representatives. And the last comment I would like to make has to do with the education programs in the District of Columbia.
Well, just a moment. Can I respond first to my one amendment at a time? Do I have to hear a lecture on the Constitution, on the history, and then go from one amendment to the next amendment before I can respond, Madam Chair?
Well,
I got to take notes here. Somebody needs to give me a written record.
If you don't mind, I'll finish, and then I'll be happy to recognize you. I don't know the exact amount of money that's being spent per student in the District of Columbia, but I understand it's between $18,000 and $20,000.
That is absolutely not the case, and I will get for the record what the amount is.
Well, I just want to say that just having charter schools in an area does not guarantee a good education for students. And I think granting some choices to the children here is a very positive thing. Now, Ms. Norton.
Madam Chair, I do not appreciate your paternalism. I do not. And I don't appreciate your history lesson or your constitutional lesson. I am myself a trained constitutional scholar who has argued before the Supreme Court of the United States, and I do not need to have you preach the Constitution to me when I am here but since you have, I will insist upon responding. I just want to give a blanket response to the notion that Democrats have voted for abortion. Some of my colleagues voted against choice. Some vote for choice. We have a very diverse caucus. There are circumstances under which some members who are notoriously pro-choice have had to vote for bills because of whatever else is in the bill, and you know that full well. But in case you don't, let me say here, if you were to cite my mother having voted against the District of Columbia, that would not convince me it was right. Democrats or Republicans, we are American citizens, every bit as much as you. As for your lordship over the District of Columbia, let me respond to that. For 150 years, the District of Columbia had no mayor, had no city council, and had no local government. If you are proud of that, I don't think that anybody else in the world would be. The reason for that, Madam Chair, had nothing to do with your party It had everything to do with mine. Southern Democrats kept the district from having a home rule government for 150 years, even though black people were the minority in the District of Columbia, because they were so offended that there would be any semblance of equality in representation of any kind, even local representation. Southern Democrats were overpowered in 1973, and the Congress, using the very section you cite, did the following. They delegated the authority that they had exercised for 150 years undemocratically, something that nobody should be proud of. They delegated that. They threw up their hands and said, we were wrong. We were wrong as Democrats to act as overseers of American citizens. We hereby, by statute, delegate to you authority over local affairs in the District of Columbia. And, Madam Chair, they have kept to that, except when they haven't. And when they haven't, it is when they have had a philosophical or ideological disagreement with what the American citizens who live in the District of Columbia have done. Not when we have done something wrong, but when our view of reproductive choice is different from your view. When our view of vouchers is different from your view. You do not intervene into the appropriations of the District of Columbia because you would know how to. You have no idea what a complex city budget is all about. You use the district budget here in order to hang on it your views of what we should do. You should be ashamed, should never cite it to me. Republicans were not part of this. They were in the minority. It wasn't that they jumped up and said that the District of Columbia should be treated as equal citizens. But it is not your party, it is mine, who was responsible. It is now your party, although the reason your party is denying the residents of the District of Columbia their democratic rights as citizens of the United States is not for racial reasons. Yours is for philosophical and ideological disagreements with ours. It comes out to the same thing. You're snatching our rights as American citizens. You're making us less equal than you. I am not, madam, any less equal than you, nor are the people I represent, and we refuse to concede your version of the Constitution that would say we should be treated as second-class citizens. We are not on your plantation, and we will not be treated as if we were. Yes, many people oppose abortion. Seated on this panel are some members whose constituents would not have abortion and others who would. That is what a democratic government is all about. If that is the case for any other jurisdiction in the United States, we will never rest until we get that same equality of treatment. Yes, people will vote for bills against their will, just like there will be Democrats that vote for this congressional resolution against their will. They will vote for an anti-choice amendment that they believe is wrong. They have no choice, and you know it. And you have voted for matters on which you have no choice. This is a matter pure and simple of whether this Congress believes that the people I represent are equal to the people you represent. And I tell you, Madam Chair, we are. We insist that we are, and you will always see me before this committee every time you try to pass something in this committee that says we are not.
Mr. Bishop.
Ms. Norton, without trying to recreate the speech you just gave, first of all, Mr. Kucinich, I appreciate your amendment. And I I think we're going to have further discussions on this again in the future. Very much thank you for coming up here. Ms. Norton, and this is not the appropriate time to go with this, but there will be at some time. Ms. Fox read to you a concept of Article 1, Section 8, I think it's Clause 17 of the Constitution, but she did not read the second half of that. Do you have an opinion on the second half of that clause?
Which second half are you referring to?
Of Article 1, Section.
What is that? What are you referring to?
Ma'am, she read you the first part of that.
Yeah, well, she read me what she was talking about. Would you read me what you were talking about?
I don't have it here, but if I were to paraphrase it, it would also say that, thank you.
Well, paraphrase. Why don't you paraphrase it since you are citing it, sir?
Well, I'll see if I can actually pull it up here since Mr. Kucinich did for you already. Section 8.
These are numbered here.
No one looks at technology here. Good grief. Okay, and after they talk about the district to become the seat of government and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenal, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Do you have an opinion on that portion of it?
None.
Okay. As a Westerner, we will be talking about this one again as well, because in some respects you would be surprised how we do have some things in common here, and mine relates to that last half of it. So if you can find needful buildings that cover 70% of the state of Utah, we may have something in common here. Thank you, ma'am. I'll yield back.
Mrs. Slaughter.
Norton, thank you very much for being here. I have all the sympathy in the world for what you've accomplished. I really appreciate the civil remarkable thing. I'm always forgetting to do that, turn this on. It usually doesn't work anyway. But in any case, thank you very much for what I thought was the most eloquent defense. Mr. Kucinich, always appreciate what you're doing. It's an odd thing to me that if we're going to talk about cutting the deficit is the most important thing in the world, why we are not allowed to talk about spending $8 billion a month on war. That we absolutely ignore that as though it had no effect whatever on what we're doing here. Thank you for always reminding us.
Would the gentlelady yield for just 1 second? Mr. Kucinich, have you brought up this particular issue as a privileged motion on the floor? I believe you brought up Afghanistan motion as a privilege. Have you done Libya as a privileged motion?
No, sir. This is in the form of
This is an amendment
to the bill.
But have you done it as a privileged motion?
No, not yet. No.
Not yet? Then we
I
may
think
indeed.
that I see this as being the first opportunity
I see.
to bring the issue before the House through addressing the Rules Committee.
So we may
I'm
indeed
grateful.
have a chance to discuss this again. Thank you. That was the question.
Welcome. I yield back.
Mr. Woodall.
I have no questions, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern.
Ms. Holmes-Norton, thank you very much. I thank you for your eloquence here tonight, and I certainly agree with you. And Mr. Kucinich, I agree with your amendment. I just say one thing. I bring this up here all the time. You know, we hear everybody up here, and when they talk about war, whether it's in Libya or Afghanistan or Iraq, they talk. We all sit up here and cheer on these wars, and then never pay for them. Here we are talking about a continuing resolution for the remaining of this year, which makes some very tough cuts and a whole bunch of programs, and we're all making tough choices. But no one ever thinks about making the tough choice of saying to the American people that if you want to go to war, and if you really support going to war, you ought to pay for it. That's a problem with Iraq. It's a problem with Afghanistan. It's a problem with what's happening right now in Libya. And this has been, a fairly recent development where we don't want to pay for war. I remind people when George Bush, the first George Bush, went to war against Saddam Hussein when he invaded Kuwait, he went around and got member nations to pitch in to help pay for the war. And what wasn't paid for, Congress was asked to pay for it. Now, I oppose these wars. I agree with you. I think I'm very uneasy about what's happening in Libya. I think we should get out of Afghanistan. We should end our involvement in Iraq. But for those who disagree with me, then, stand up, and make the tough choice and say to the American people that we're all going to pay for it. We're not going to put it on a credit card. And that's one of the great tragedies of this debate on deficit reduction is that, poor people have to take the hit. But, when it comes to war, we could do it and no one has to pay for it. But I thank you for your courage for being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern. Let me just say that we have 2 votes on the floor. I've just cast my vote. I know that Mr. Pitts is scheduled to be testifying next along with Mr. Pallone. If you all would like to vote, it's my hope that we'll be able to continue and just have members cast these 2 votes on the floor. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kucinich, I full well support your measure and gather that my good friend, a teacher of history from the West, does recognize the slight distinction about what happens with reference to the District of Columbia insofar as the level of citizenship. And Ms. Holmes Norton, I would agree, and I believe you would as well, Mr. Bishop, feels very strongly that the district is deserving of representation like you have, notwithstanding that second clause that might have its own ambiguity. But the District of Columbia is in the category, at least in 1973, of having been given home rule. And if a majority of its people choose to do something, then they have that right that we have given to them. But I think it should go further. As a matter of fact, I thought Utah and the District of Columbia should have married and gotten themselves another vote in Utah and one, at least, in the District of Columbia. Ms. Norton didn't go far enough. And Ms. Norton, just to correct the record, where you were in the midst of your remarks, you commented at the time that it was done, that the city was minority black. It actually was majority black at the time, and I would. Yeah.
It was majority white city until almost 1960,
right.
and
right.
even so, the Southern Democrats took a lot of white people down with them because nobody had any democracy.
Their whole thing, when you cut through all of this stuff, their whole thing was they didn't want to wind up with 2 black senators. And that's basically what it was all about. They don't say it, and nobody wants to say it. I just am bold enough to say what the real deal was. It isn't all that much to understand. But what is important is that we not in the abstract here take the District of Columbia's women, poor women, who happen to be of every race, and their reproductive medical care, and run it ideologically into some notion like abortions don't take place nowhere but here. And when you hear it in the abstract, it's as if it's a whole lot. If it comes right down to it, the reporting agencies, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the reporting agencies in the last couple of years have reported a meager $65,000 of utilization of this particular aspect of the district's money, not flying in the face of any ban or that whoever may have voted on. Am I correct in that regard?
Yes, you are. It's a pittance.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Scott. Mr. Reed. Mr. Webster. Thanks to you both for being here. Thank you very much. And Mr. Sablon did not return, I see. And thank you very much, Dennis. Nice to see you. And Mr. Conyers, I guess, is not going to be here. So that will close the hearing for H.R. 1473. And we're going to, as soon as we have the return of Messrs. Pitts and Pallone, proceed with consideration of H.R. 1217 from the Energy and Commerce Committee to repeal the Prevention and Public Health Fund. And so we will just wait for those witnesses and and hope that they'll be back soon. So. I was told there were 2 votes. Two more. Oh, there are 3 votes. Oh, I was worried. Well, you know, the answer is I just announced that as soon as Mr. Pitts arrived, that we're going to proceed with his testimony. So we can do that, and it's not like a vigorous young guy like you, Mr. Webster. You can bound those steps in 20 seconds. I'm happy to run back. I know. We're very, very happy to have you. So, Mr. Pitts, please let me just say that without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Section 4002 of PPACA establishes a Prevention and Public Health Fund, which my bill, H.R. 1217, would repeal. And Section 4002 authorizes the appropriations of and appropriates to the fund from the Treasury amounts from $500 million beginning in 2010.
Mr. Pallone, please sit at the table here.
Increasing amounts each fiscal year until the fiscal year 2015, where it's at $2 billion a year and every year thereafter in perpetuity. The Energy and Commerce Committee has grave concerns that Section 4002 gives extremely broad discretion to an executive agency with little accountability. The Secretary of Health and Human Services has the full authority to use this account to fund any programs or activities under the Public Health Service Act that she chooses, without congressional input, approval, or oversight. HHS has already made 3 disbursements from this fund, totaling over $1.3 billion to fund prevention activities under Section 4002. And the goals of these disbursements from the fund, totaling that amount, are laudable. But we must remember that this funding is over and above the amount that Congress has already authorized or appropriated for these activities. When Secretary Sebelius appeared before our Health Subcommittee on March 3rd, I asked her whether she needed further congressional approval to spend the money from Section 4002 fund, and she answered no. I then asked her if she could fund activities above and beyond the level of funding that Congress appropriated, and she replied yes. This, I think, should concern every member that a slush fund has been created from which the Secretary can spend without any congressional oversight or approval. No one here can tell us how this funding will be used next year or 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 years from now. We can't predict how the money will be spent, and worse, we can't even influence how it should be spent. And I would suggest to members that, you know, if you want more funding to go towards things like smoking cessation or any other prevention or public health fund, you should make your argument before the normal appropriations process. And I suggest this because you are not guaranteed that a dime of the money in this fund will go to your particular priority. By eliminating this fund, we're not cutting any specific program or activity. I am certainly not against prevention and wellness, but that is not what this is about. This is about reclaiming our oversight role of how federal tax dollars should be spent, about setting spending priorities. We can no longer afford to create new mandatory spending programs and set them on autopilot. reining in government spending is the only responsible course to take if we're to avoid a debt crisis. And H.R. 1217 helps achieve this goal by eliminating a mandatory appropriations free of congressional oversight created in PPACA. And for the information of the members, the Health Subcommittee, which I chair, held hearings on March 3rd and March 9th. We marked up this legislation on March 31st, reported it favorably to the full committee by a vote of 14-11. The full committee then marked up on April 5th and favorably reported my bill by a vote of 26-16, which brings us to today. So I urge support for 1217. Yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pitts. We greatly appreciate it. Let me note the presence of Mr. Bob Slaughter, who's here visiting the Rules Committee, as he often does. We're very happy to have you back once again, Mr. Slaughter. And yes, well, I thought I'd do it in Louise's absence. Is what I thought I'd do. Mr. Pallone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, the opponents of the Affordable Care Act have tried unsuccessfully to date to repeal the law and defund it. I understand there may be another vote to repeal it, in fact, this week in conjunction with the CR. But now the House Republican majority is considering a new approach to undermining law, and that's eliminating the mandatory funding provided to the Department of Health and Human Services to implement key parts of the law. The incredible thing is that what we have before us today is that particular part that deals with prevention and public health, the Prevention and Public Health Fund, which assists state and community efforts to prevent illness and promote health so that all Americans can lead longer, more productive lives. And the fund helps prevent disease, detect it early, and manage conditions before they become severe. Now, I don't know that you all remember, but many times when I appeared before the Rules Committee in the past few years to talk about the health care reform, I always stress the need for prevention. And I always stress the fact that prevention saves money, because people, if they stay well and they get primary care and they see a doctor, then they don't get sick, go to the hospital, and end up being more of a ward of the state if there's nobody to pay for it. So I find it incredible that the first effort here to defund the Affordable Care Act is positioned against the Prevention and Public Health Fund, because I can't think of anything that's more important, not only in terms of this health care reform, the Affordable Care Act, but in general, than preventing illness before people get sick. We're simply never going to bend the cost curve on health care or improve Americans' quality of life until we focus much more on disease prevention. I always thought the Democrats and Republicans wanted to keep people out of the hospital, off of disability, leading productive lives. We need to prevent diseases before they occur, and we need to have a system of well care, not sick care. I don't think it should be a Democratic versus Republican issue. Before the Affordable Care Act, prevention activities were chronically underfunded, accounting for only 2 to 4% of national health care expenditures. Considering that chronic diseases eat up about 75% of our $2 trillion in annual health care spending, an additional $2 billion for wellness and prevention, I think, is a wise investment. I wanted to say, too, because I heard my good friend, and I really do respect Mr. Pitts quite a bit, but he talked about the mandatory funding. I want you to know that the mandatory funding aspect of this was well documented. CBO looked at it very carefully during the course of the health care reform debate, and we do mandatory funding now every year, millions of dollars in Medicare, Medicaid, and other federal health programs to pay for health care services. So the idea that somehow this mandatory funding is something new or something different, something that Democrats and Republicans haven't both relied on, is simply not true. The other thing I want to debunk is the idea, contrary to what the Republicans have suggested, both in the Health Subcommittee and today, is that in the bill itself, we provide for the appropriators to actually allocate and appropriate the funds. The only reason that the mandatory funding, or the discretion, if you will, of the Health and Human Service Secretary kicks in is under 4002D of the Act. If the House and Senate committees have not allocated the fund during the appropriation process, in other words, they basically failed to do so. They failed to pass a Labor, Health, and Human Services appropriations bill. Then the Secretary has the authority to allocate the prevention fund. The bill specifically says that that is the job of the appropriators, and it's only when they fail to do it, which of course is what happened in this last year, that it's up to the discretion. So I don't want to give you the impression either that this isn't something that we've routinely done as Democrats and Republicans, or that there isn't a role here for the appropriators. In fact, that's what the bill specifically does.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Pallone.
Thank you.
We greatly appreciate it. Let me just say that I'm going to encourage this committee to make in order all substantive amendments and amendments that comply with the rules of the House. And so there will be an opportunity if the committee follows my encouragement. They may not, but I'm going to encourage this committee to allow amendments from members of both political parties to be made in order that I said are both substantive and comply with the rules of the House. So I have no questions. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank you both for being here, and I want to thank Mr. Pitts particularly and his subcommittee for understanding that we have to have additional accountability for the way taxpayer funds are being spent. And since there is no accountability whatsoever for this allocation, I think it's entirely appropriate that these funds be taken from the mandatory category. Mr. Pallone, I think accountability should be the middle name of all of us in the Congress. We have to. We've never had all the money that we need. We have less now than we've ever had before in terms of the needs of the country. And we have to make absolutely certain that every penny is being spent as wisely as it can be. And I want to see us have additional.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fox.
Can I just briefly say, you and I have had this discussion before, and my whole point is that when you do prevention, you save money. And I think a lot of us believe that and should. So I think we're saving money with this prevention fund.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern.
I thank the gentleman, and let me just say, we should be honest about what this is about. This is not about accountability. This is about a kind of a piece-by-piece dismantling of the Affordable Health Care Act, and I think going after prevention first here to me seems particularly unfortunate because that's where you actually save the money. But I get what this is, and we'll end up dealing with it.
Thank you very much. Let me just say again, as I did earlier, I see Ms. Jackson-Lee has joined us. It's my intention to encourage this committee to make in order all amendments, and incidentally, there are no Republican amendments, all the Democratic amendments that comply with the rules of the House and are substantive. So I just want the gentlewoman to know that if the committee does follow my encouragement on this, we'll have an amendment that you have offered made in order. Mr. Bishop.
I think I've already expended my allowed words for today.
Okay. Then Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include the statement.
Without objection,
Gerald
it'll be included in the record.
In support of his amendment. Mr. Chairman, I just adopt the minority committee's reference that I believe that the matter before us, thanking both gentlemen here, is highly regressive, extremely short-sighted, and deeply divisive.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nugent. Mr. Webster. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for being here. We appreciate your service, and we'll look forward to consideration of your measure. As I said to Ms. Jackson-Lee, your amendment, I'm going to encourage the committee to make your amendment in order, and we know we have votes pending on the floor. If you'd like to submit a statement for the record, if you'd like to offer a statement to us, certainly, please.
Mr. Chairman, while Ms. Jackson-Lee's getting, can I ask unanimous consent to?
Without objection, it will be included in the record.
For America's health.
We'll look forward to it.
To the Rules Committee, I thank, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy. So I'll simply say that I have 3 amendments. I think the premises are that prevention of disease, prevention of injury are important premises of the Affordable Care Act. And certainly, if there are going to be rescission or defunding, I think the American public should know that they'll be losing uncompensated care dollars from hospitals, that there will be preventive care dollars lost, and so the 3 amendments are here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson-Lee. We appreciate your
And if the rule statements are still open, Mr. Chairman, I would just
without objection, your statement will be included in the record.
And I would like to associate myself with the amendment of Ms. Eleanor Holmes Norton that was in the previous amendment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson-Lee. We very much appreciate your being.
And I thank you for allowing me to speak that quickly.
And Ms. Schwartz and Ms. Wilson were scheduled to be here. Let me just say that we'll encourage their remarks to be presented in the record, and that'll close the hearing. And yes,
closing,
Mr.
I'd
Hastings.
also like unanimous consent.
Of course, without objection,
include
the statement will be
cancer,
included in
heart,
the
and
record.
lung
So we all have copies of the rule. Right. Oh, we know that. We know that. We know exactly what we're doing on the floor. So, everybody got the rules? Here you are. The chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Fox.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a closed rule for the consideration of H.R. 1473, the Department of Defense and Full Year Continuing Appropriations Act 2011. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of orders against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides one motion to recommit the bill. The rule further provides that if the bill is passed, it shall be in order to separately consider H. Con. Res. 35 and H. Con. Res. 36, each under a closed rule. The rule provides 20 minutes of debate on each concurrent resolution to be equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of each concurrent resolution and provides that each concurrent resolution shall be considered as read. Finally, the rule provides that if the House receives a message from the Senate transmitting its passage of H.R. 1473 without amendment, then the clerk shall not certify an enrollment of the bill until notified by the Speaker or by message from the Senate that the Senate has taken the question on adoption of H. Con. Res. 35 and H. Con. Res. 36 if previously adopted by the House.
You've heard the motion. Any discussion or amendment? Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move to strike sections 2 and 3 of the rule.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. I think those have to do with the two items on the separate votes. And again, this is stemming from the agreement, and I encourage a no vote on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair the noes have it. Clerk, call the roll.
No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Mitchell? Mr. Wells? Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Scott? Mr. Wester? No. Mr. Reed? Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. Eason? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye.
No. And clerk report the total. And the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community. Ms. Schwartz, we're very happy to have you. We will include your statement in the record. We have, as I said, we were moving through the votes here, and so we'll look forward to it. And I also wanted to say that we are making in order every substantive amendment and any amendment that complies with the rules of the House to the legislation. So thank you very much.
I think I was kind of waving.
I'm sorry?
I had a motion before.
I'm sorry.
Amendment to the rule.
Oh, I didn't hear your. Maybe I'm having a problem with my hearing. I just got it tested and it was fine. I'm not. We'll check on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to.
We'll ask our staff. We'll just tell her that, please. Mr. Polis.
Thank you. One moment. I'm finding my amendment here. I move to make an order and provide any necessary waivers for my amendment number 4, as well as my amendment number 12, one of which would reduce the amount of troops permanently stationed in Europe from 80,000 to 35,000, the other of which would strike all funding for the Office of the Drug Policy Control, commonly known as the Drug Czar.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Any further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the Polis amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair the noes have it.
Roll call vote, Mr. Chair.
Call the roll.
No.
Aye.
No. Clerk report total. And the motion is 3 yeas and 7 nays. The motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk call the roll.
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, I didn't call it a housing.
Scott? Aye. Mr. Webster? Mr. Reed? Aye. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
No.
No. No.
Aye. Clerk report the total. And the motion is agreed to. And I'll be managing this for the majority. And Mr. Polis for the minority. And the chair will be in receipt of a second motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee report a structured rule for consideration of H.R. 1217 to repeal the Prevention and Public Health Fund. This rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. Rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report. May be offered.
The gentleman could suspend. I don't know if there are any members who haven't voted. I'm told there's only 25 seconds left on this second vote, so we're going to recess for about 4 minutes, and then I'll just take the last vote then, okay? So we'll be in recess for 5 minutes.
So meet me there now.
Margaret. The committee will reconvene. I think that when we went down for that last vote, that we were in the midst of hearing a brilliant motion offered by the gentleman from the Big D, and he'd like to start over again, if that's all right with everyone.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee report a structured rule for consideration of H.R. 1217 to repeal the provision. I'm sorry, I got it wrong again. Prevention and Public Health Fund. This rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule waives that. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule makes an order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the committee of the whole. All points of order consideration against the amendments are waived. Finally, the rule provides one motion recommit with or without instructions.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. As you can see, we've made it in order 3 amendments. They're all offered by Democrats, and as I said, the criteria which we have used are amendments that comply with the rules of the House and amendments that are substantive amendments. And so we've made in order the Jackson Lee amendment and 2 amendments by our former Rules Committee colleague, Ms. Castor. So are there any amendments? Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Rules Committee provide an open rule.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Any further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. The chair,
Ask
the
for
ayes.
roll call.
The noes have it. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions?
No.
Mr. Fox?
No.
Mr. Bishop? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Scott? Mr. Wester? No. Mr. Reed? No. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No. The clerk report the total. And the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Yes, sir,
Mr.
Mr.
Hastings.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. Move the committee make in order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Mr. Pallone, his number 5, which would add a sense of Congress supporting 4 studies that support the claim that prevention saves lives and money.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Any further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the Hastings amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those
Aye.
opposed, no. In the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Hastings.
I have another amendment, and I move the committee make in order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Mr. Pallone, number 6, which would add a sense of Congress that health or prevention efforts saves or save lives and money.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Let me just say again, just as was the case in the last amendment, neither of these amendments are germane, and so I'm going to encourage a no vote. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. In the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that one, since we do have waiver powers, I do ask a recorded vote.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions?
No.
Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Scott? Mr. Wester? No. Mr. Reed? No. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Mr. Polis? Aye. Chairman?
No. And the clerk report the total. And the motion is not agreed to. There are further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. In the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion is agreed to. And this will be managed by Ms. Fox for the majority.
Mr. Hastings.
And Mr. Hastings for the minority. Thank you all very much. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.